Thank you.
What's up, everyone? Hope everyone's having a great day. First, I just want to start by talking about how UFC is a monopoly. In 2015, the UFC generated $609 million in revenue. And revenue shares paid to the fighters was around 19%. Just imagine that, guys. The fighters are the ones out there putting their life on the line, taking the damage, and they only got paid 19% of that profit. And that's just all the fighters, right? So moving forward, in 2022, the UFC generated $1.1 billion in revenue. Revenue share paid to the fighters actually went down. It went down to about 13%. Imagine that. And it's just upsets me because the fighters are the product and they put their life on the line and they fight. Yes, we do have a choice. We make that choice, but we step in the ring, but the fighters should be getting paid here, not the promoters. In 2015, UFC, I have my tongue twister, so I'm just going to pronounce it. EBITDA was $189 million with 31% margins. In 2022, the UFC EBITDA was $629 million with a 55% margin. And then in 2015, UFC net profit was $119 million with a 31% margin. In 2022, UFC's net profit was $387 million with a 34% margin. So let's pick the three top boxing promotion, like Matchroom Boxing, one of the three largest boxing promotion. We reported profits just around $14 million, and $387 million in the net profit. Profits likely to exceed the profits of all MMA promotions and boxing promotion combined. That's what UFC made because of their fighters, not because of them, not because of their brand, because of the fights and the fighters that were put together and risked their life on inside that octagon. So incredibly, despite these results, fighters paid in 2022 of $146 million is less than the estimated fighters pay in 2016 of $148 million. That is crazy. But here's the thing. In other words, these four individuals, like Dana White, Lorenzo Fertitas, the Fertitta brothers, they all made more than all the fighters in the UFC history put together. That's 2,500 fighters combined. They also bought a $400 million. Let me take that back. They bought two $400 million yachts. And while the fighters, they are struggling, and they are struggling because of the pay and how unfair it is. So that's what I got for you guys. How do you guys feel about that? Think that's fair?
No.
No. Guys, have any questions? All right, I'll let the next speaker come up.
Thank you, Tom. I'm CB Dalloway, a former UFC middleweight, 21-fight veteran. And some of you guys might be asking how they've achieved this result they've gotten with the money they're making and paying the fighters so little. It's basically corruption hiding in plain sight through matchmaking. The current structure of MMA and the matchmaking practices are inhibiting fighters to make what they're really worth. If you look back historically with the matchmaking process, it involves the manager, fighter, work with a promoter, and then they have an independent sanctioning bodies. They make sure fair fights are put on. This really affects the trajectory of an athlete's career. And Yeah, so it comes down to the art of matchmaking. You know, it's unique to combat sports. Some of the things they control, or I'm gonna step back real quick. One thing we can all agree on is combat sports is inherently dangerous, correct? You know, I was just looking before we came here, there's been 9 deaths in MMA over the years since its 25-year history. So these matchmakers and the matches that are made, if they're unfairly made, puts people at risk. And it's an individual sport, it's not leagues, there's no set dates. Matchmakers control when you fight, where you fight. They'll push you to do what they want, what's best for the promotion, not always what's best for the athlete. That's where it comes in. The managers need to be more empowered, make more of the decisions for the athlete, not the other way around, not the promotion telling the manager to tell the athlete what to do. We should have a representation for us to make sure our best interest is put onto the table. 2 examples of this that I'd like to bring about here is one involving Roger Huerta, when he went on the cover of Sports Illustrated to protest fighter pay and sponsorships that he was being denied. Joe Silva asked a former friend and teammate of mine, Gray Maynard, which Gray Maynard came out on a podcast and said this. He asked Gray to make sure he breaks Roger Huerta's arm. Obviously, there's a little bit of a mismatch with Gray being, you know, a phenomenal wrestler, ground guy against a striker. So Joe Silva is able to make that match. You can't really deny him. You deny too many matches, UFC will release you. And one of the other instances of this was involving Nate Quarry, when I believe on a podcast he came out as well and said, Joe Silva once told him, "If you don't like my first matchup," and I quote, "you're sure as hell, or you're sure as shit aren't going to like the second." So it's kind of one of those things, he's going to force you into the matchup he wants, which isn't always best for the athlete. It's what's best for the promotion. These managers are kind of acting as brokers for the UFC and not the other way around. They're not representing the fighter's best interest. They need to have more power in making sure fighters get matchups that are quality matchups for them, competitive matchups, so they can control their own trajectory to the title. This isn't meant to be a 20-year career. You come in, you do your fights, you go for the title, you make your money, and you're out. Like I believe Elena Reed earlier was saying, you know, she's facing some of the consequences of her career. You know, she had a pretty long career, is, you know, experiencing, you know, headaches, dizziness, dizzy spells and stuff. So, you know, there needs to be people looking out for the fighters, protecting the fighters. So I believe, you know, adding the Muhammad Ali Expansion Act would be huge for us in protecting the fighters moving forward. Thank you guys very much.
Hi guys. Yeah, so this evening a few things were mentioned, okay, and we're bringing it up. Basically, one of the main points in this presentation for us is we want to try and open your eyes to the fact that destroying competition is not the same thing as beating the competition. In boxing, there is real competition because of the structure. In MMA, that doesn't even happen. Competition on every level is and has been systematically destroyed. I'm going to cut to the chase. You guys don't understand. There's so much conflict of interest in this room. I felt it as an athlete, 23 years old, when I was the MMA champion. I knew it then. I stayed in university, I graduated, I won my title against Matt Hughes, and I went back the next day and wrote my 4th year psychology exam. The next day. Because I, as a young man, knew you guys were failing. And I was not going to give you all my eggs in one basket. That's it. And you can hear in my voice, I hate it. I hate the fact that I, as a young athlete, believed in everyone in this room, and I still do not, to this day, can stand here and know who I should be trusting. Because for me, it's self-evident in the structure of the sport that this is the case. MMA, UFC started out as a tournament, which is very fair. But after it started to just be a promoter owning their own title, that's when things changed. That's when the bait and switch happened. And this is what is being willfully ignored, or in some cases, some people just keeping their mouth shut and toeing the line. Because $12 billion can shut a lot of mouths, whether they like it or not. Some of us are on, reaching retirement, we just shut up, all right? But basically, we've been down this road before. The structure in mixed martial arts was outlawed in boxing in the 1800s. If you guys check your charters for most of your sanctioned bodies, you're incorporated in 1925. And that's when they started to allow the licensed sanctioned body, in which a famous boxing case, International Boxing Club versus the US government, brings this to the forefront. The IBC exploited fighters by circumventing the structure of their combat sports at the time, boxing, wrestling, and so forth. And by doing so, established that championship bouts, the courts established through the litigation that championship bouts are a separate market, generating far higher revenue and public interest. The IBC, in their trick, bribed sanctioned bodies, made fighters sign exclusive contracts in order to get a title fight. IBC lost that case against the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court, as a consequence, prohibited them from having exclusive contracts for 5 years, just so that the public notoriety of what a championship title was and who was a champion could rebalance itself. This is what happens when the notoriety of the title becomes more important or is better known to the public than the actual fighter themselves. In court talk, that's called market is unresponsive to competition at that point. All right? Next thing, before the hearings, these are the boxing structures. Basic organizations of boxing structures. You have licensed promoter, licensed matchmaker. And we all know, even in boxing, 90% of that competition takes place outside the ring. Managers, promoters, everyone jockeying for position. In boxing, training sessions are private. They're top secret. They're like freaking the Iran nuclear program. All right? You don't show nobody that. And basically, in MMA, that doesn't happen. All right? And this is why we need the Muhammad Ali Reform Act to cover everything. Everyone's talking about rules. I don't care about rules. I don't care how many times you're allowed to punch or how many minutes you're allowed to fight for. None of that matters if the structure is broken. None of it matters if the structure is broken. All right? So basically, for example here, another problem with the sport is the monopoly of championship titles. That's what every boxing promoter dreams for. To always be promoting the champion. In mixed martial arts, that happens by default. Rather than having to bribe a sanctioned body or to buy someone off or anything, it just happens by default. Think of this fact. In mixed martial arts, with the structure, in order for us, top athletes, to compete against one another, we actually have to now compete for the same promoter. There's no way to avoid that. We have to. It's fixed by default. In boxing, you have co-promotions, which is a very healthy thing. So basically, yes, for example, one of the elements in boxing at the time, Don King, it makes him look good. Because I asked you the question. Yes, Don King's known a lot in court cases and so forth for some of the things he did to disenfranchise fighters, to rip fighters off. But imagine Don King could say, you know what, IBC, IBF, WC, screw you guys. I'm going to put on the King title. And I'm going to make these guys all fight for it. Do you think he would be paying more money to the fighters over time or less as a result? And this is going to be self-evident in the next thing, right? The UFC doesn't need to collude or corrupt third parties to do that. The ability for them to do it is built into the structure already. All right? By controlling the rank and the title, the UFC has monopolized MMA. And I hate saying that the UFC has done it. quite frankly, anyone could have done it if they just had to be first at doing it, right? So no special sauce or anything's involved. There's no promotional genius or anything. And again, I start with what I said earlier. Destroying competition is not the same thing as beating competition. When boxers have promoters bidding to promote their fight, that's one promoter beating the other promoter. And as a result, that fighter also makes more money. And when that fighter makes more money, everyone's making more money. Alright? And this is where it comes out. They are masquerading as sport while being able to operate as a reality show. MMA is professional wrestling where guys punch one another for real. It's plain and simple. It's kind of written even into their contracts. Okay? So basically, in our investigation for our antitrust case, in our depositions of multiple stakeholders in the sport of prize fighting, one well-known promoter said this. Boxing promoter, Lou Degla, answers question during the deposition. If the Bella Entertainment issued its own titles and ranks of boxers, would that increase the control that the Bella Entertainment would have over boxers? He responds incredulously, obviously, and lawyers ask, why is that obvious? Lou says, the entity, you would have total control. The entity paying the fighter would be the one determining who the champion is, determining who the challengers would be, and basically would put into you and anyone else near total control over the fighter. Right? How this differs from, say, you ask yourselves, is different from professional wrestling? In professional wrestling, the outcome of every match is determined, predetermined. But in MMA, although the outcome isn't predetermined, it is skewed. It is, who knows what side of the bed the guy woke up on when they made the decision who they're going to put together. But at the end of the day, though, ascension to the title is determined. When the promoter can determine your rank and who fights next, and at that point, that's all they need. They can determine who they want to fight, how much they want to pay you, and they can also control where they want to fight. Which is where they have you guys by the tail. The dogs wagging the tail. The state of Utah paid tax money to get a UFC venue in the state of Utah. They subsidized a UFC event. I would like to see Don King pulling the same trick. I would like to see Oscar De La Hoya asking the state of New York, hey, give me $2 million and I'll bring the next top-ranked fight to New York. Next Golden Boy fight. Anything like that. So basically, after acquiring and shutting down Pride, WEC, other competitors, buying the competitors and shelving them, not beating them, not offering more money, not offering better services, no, just purchasing them and shelving them. The acquisition was pending. Joe Silva, the UFC matchmaker, who I've known from the get-go, from the beginning, said to Daniel White and Lorenzo Fertitta in an email that we got through our subpoenas, said in this email, where they have just purchased all these promotions and shelved them, basically said, we own now the contracts, the contractual rights, the exclusive rights to all the top 15 fighters in all 5 weight classes. And in the subject matter heading, he says, we own MMA. So, the structure, I talked earlier about managers' obligations and so forth. But if the structure does not enable any of us to do our job properly, it's falling differs. So at the end of the day, managers who control rank and title have fighters that have to go through their brokers who then give them to the promoters. That's how managing in MMA works. Right? We don't have managers. Promotional control of rank and title is a reality show production, not a sport. Because every organized sport consults its athletes. Baseball, gymnastics, every organized sport consults their athletes. Every one of them. whether they be individual sports or they be league sports. And what ties and what makes a sport is structure, it's regulatory structure that enables everyone to freely move horizontally between different service providers and at the same time keep climbing the ladder to glory. So, we'll go back to the other one. So, during a conversation with another regulator, Christine Anthony of Washington, during a slap fighting contest, participants utilize blows to defeat an opponent without the use of gloves and opponents are not able to defend themselves. Gloves and the ability for participants to defend themselves, among other safety requirements in our laws and rules, are in place to protect the safety and welfare of all participants. In addition, it's unknown if these participants are trained in the sport of martial arts. If not, this type of contest may be just considered combative fighting, which is illegal in the majority of states. So if athletes are just going in the ring, punching one another for someone to decide the outcome of that is totally not based on any quantifiable or competitive format, it's just fighting. It literally is just fighting. I want you guys to think hard about that. It's literally just fighting. If you guys would have your kids just go to the school ground and just fight, and that's how they got through their day, just by fighting, I question your parental skills. Alright? Promotional control of rank and title is a reality show production, not a sport. The UFC's chief operating officer admitted UFC titles were not real and merely ceremonial. We have this in their contracts through subpoenas. In that this is a concerted effort and a deliberate effort to say this is not competition. And this court, and I mean the Supreme Court, has already stated in other court litigation, when you destroy competition between athletes, you destroy competition between commerce. You destroy the competition between the managers. You destroy the competition between the sanctioning bodies. You destroy the competition between the promoters. No one competes. Because everything everyone is competing for is structured around that athlete competing for a title. It could be tennis, it could be football, it could be anything. Alright? But then when it wasn't a title shot, but yet it was for a title shot, Mullen, at the time, the state congressman that we were working with to get the Ali Act to expand and cover all combat sports, then at the time said, then by that means the world championship belt that the UFC has isn't really a world championship belt. It's really what the UFC chief operating officer, Lawrence Epstein, personally told me. It's simply an award they bestow on the fighter, the best fighter that night. That's insulting to every professional athlete. At that time, when they had a conversation, Congressman Mullen kicked him out of his office. And at the end of the day, I want you guys to remember, destroying competition is not the same thing as beating the competition. All I came here today was to ask for a right to compete. And this was already litigated. This was what was the basic premise of the Ali Act in the first place. Every one of us has a right to compete in our workplace, and our job is that type of workplace. And when guys talk about unions and things like that, my job, I know, and the job of every fellow fighter that I hug and call friend, their job is to put me out of the job as quickly as possible in the shortest period of time and get paid as much as they could for it. And make sure I get paid as little as possible. That's their job. Unionize those guys. If you had a union like that in your workplace, you wouldn't share the locker with anyone. Alright? So all this garbage about unions, using the term league, these are not leagues. Alright? This is an individual sport. And it has to be structured competitively like any other individual sport. And the longer that is not, you guys are selling us out. Thank you. Oh, if you guys want more information, contact me or Ron Mason.
You have a, don't go away, you have a major, over here. You have a major antitrust suit going against the UFC. You have a trial, an anticipated trial date for that?
We don't. We are still waiting for the written opinion to be issued in the class certification decision, which has been pending for about 3.5 years now.
I remember, but that's where I left off.
Still pending.
And one of the things that could be self-evident to any person who knows antitrust is like, in a healthy marketplace, when a service provider's revenues go up, their profit margin usually shrinks. Not usually, it always does. It shrinks because there's so much money to be made that other competitors enter the marketplace. We have just shown you, the UFC's revenues have gone up, but also have their profit margins, which means in 2003, there was far more competition in the marketplace, if you want to call it that, than there is now. So when they ask you, hey, let us be the guys that put on slap fight and so forth, they're really asking you, allow us to be the monopolist of another sport. That will happen by default. In order for all of us to fight under this structure, we all have to fight for the same promoter. And that is where the competition has been destroyed.
Carlos, question over here.
Yeah.
So recently, Francis Ngannou, right? He left the UFC. He's boxing, but he also has a deal with the PFL. And with the PFL, he was able to secure $2 million for any opponent he were to face, right? The support from some of the fighters at the top of the food chain, that's maybe one example, but can you maybe share, how are some of the other fighters reacting? What are kind of the reactions that you get from other fighters?
The other fighters are reacting in the same way I did long ago. That's a desperate move. And it's the least they can do to get paid. The best I think a UFC athlete ever did in the past was just sit out and protest until they were losing more money than was worth by giving the guy an extra $1 million. If you were the promoter in their position, you would too. You'd be like, hey, George, come back. I'll give you an extra $1 million because him and Dana, all the promoters know, we'll make $200 million off that fight. So the PFL and so forth. Co-promotions in boxing happen because there's actual real competition in boxing. The UFC would never allow an athlete's name to garner enough notoriety to be able to put on their own promotion. And if an athlete ever tried to even put on their own promotion in MMA, the UFC will hold a show the same night. That doesn't happen in boxing because there's actual real competition in boxing. Golden Boy would never hold a boxing show the same night that Don King decides to hold one right next door. He wouldn't hold one in Venetian and Golden Boy would be holding one right across the street in Treasure Island. That doesn't happen in boxing because there's competition and respect one another, and there's respect amongst individuals when there's actual real competition. All right? On the other hand, if Francis Ngannou said, you know what, I want to be my own promoter, I'm going to call the WBC and ask them to put up the title. Because essentially what the UFC is doing is kind of like the Dallas Cowboys saying, hey, next month we're going to put up the Dallas Cowboys Cup. And we want every other football team out there to come and play us for it. Think any of them will show up? No. You think any other fighter will fight Francis Ngannou for his title that he put up? No. All right? And it's impossible for him to promote himself because the UFC does so many things to destroy competition, like hold a promotion the same night he would try to. All of these things have been foreclosed. You guys don't understand. My son is a great martial artist. There are tons of guys and tons of boxers whose children grew up to be great fighters. But the difference is, there will never be a Mayweather Jr. in mixed martial arts as long as the structure exists. Because Mayweather's legacy is built on the work of his father and his uncle and everyone that came before him. Eventually, if you keep competing and you're true to the game, you will succeed. In MMA, that's not possible. That is not possible. I am not going to let my 12-year-old go and compete under this structure. I will not. I know there's better, I'll in 1,000,000% have him fight as a boxer way before that.
I just had two quick things to add. The first being Francis Ngannou reached the end of his contract because of a sunset clause that was inserted as a response to our antitrust suit. 2 fighters have since used that. It was Ngannou and Silva. The UFC subsequently removed that sunset clause, so it is not in contracts going forward. And then the second and fundamental point is Francis Ngannou is a world champion mixed martial artist. He's going to make more than he has in his entire career fighting in a sport he does not excel in, boxing. Why?
So the question is I guess we're talking about this and everything else about boxer safety and health and financial situations. What's the fix? I guess obviously we see a lot of numbers up here on the board and stuff like that. Obviously I think one of them would be to include mixed martial arts in the Muhammad Ali Act. But what's the other fixes? So maybe talk about what you guys think some of those fixes are to help with the problem.
All right, so I'm gonna give you guys a longer answer than I know Rob will let me give you. So basically, every sport in the world follows this structure. If a promoter puts up their own title, they are not allowed to have exclusive contracts with athletes. If a promoter puts up, or if a promoter has exclusive contracts with an athlete, they must use a sanctioning body. That's how football works, and that's how tennis works. They follow those 2 basic structures. MMA does not follow that structure. Boxing follows one of those structures. MMA follows neither of those structures. So for us to get this sport fixed, we need, or we want, and we demand, the Muhammad Ali Act. Our other remedy is litigation, which is the only reason the Muhammad Ali Act came into being. The courts got tired of boxers going to them for remedy. It was choking up the system. And the courts just passed the Muhammad Ali Act legislation to say, let me spell it out for you this time. You can't do this. All right? Antitrust litigation is the other type of litigation that can fix this. The thing is, we've been down this road before. The litigation has taken place in other sports already. And this is a funny situation how we got here. Because we've been down this road before. We've seen guys fight for it. Because every time I bring up problems with MMA, it goes, oh, you think boxing is any better? I'll say, yes, guys. It's just kind of like comparing the 1700s to the 2000s if you're a black man. All right? I'll just spell it out for you. That's what it sounds like to me. Okay? They're night and day. And the cynicism in some people dismiss it and say, oh, it's just as bad as in boxing. We just showed you the stats. It's not. And it's insulting to me and every generation of fighter who dreams of doing this sport to make that claim. It's very dismissive and insulting.
Hey, Carlos, just one quick question. The antitrust suit is in the hands of the judiciary, which is, through no fault of your own, moving very, very glacially. And Ali Expansion Act is in the hands of federal politicians. But what do you guys ask of state and tribal commissions and the people in this room? What can they do to support your message?
Unified regulations. Every combat sport has the same outcome. 2 people enter the ring, 1 person comes out. They deserve the same regulation. Those rules you guys talk about, rounds and so forth, when you pull that cat out of the bag, it's just a distraction. It's just a distraction from the real problem. Because if an MMA athlete could make $10 million in their first pay-per-view fight instead of $10,000, their chances of concussion go down drastically. The amount of times they will fight per year goes down drastically. Their careers go from 2 years now to 20 years. And the funny thing, most MMA athletes have more fights in a 2-year career than a boxer does in a 20-year career. Make a fraction of the money. Any more questions? All right, think about it. Thanks.